They went looking for peace in the wilderness, and instead found something waiting for them in the trees. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Night Terrors, where silence is never safe, and being alone doesn't mean you're not being watched. Tonight, we dive into 3 chilling encounters that happened deep in the woods, stories of innocent campers who ventured into nature for quiet, reflection, or just a break from the world, but came face to face with something they couldn't explain. From distant figures walking the tree line, to strangers who sit too still for too long, to the horrifying moment you realize someone's outside your tent with a knife. These aren't urban legends or overblown tales. They're raw, personal accounts of moments when a peaceful getaway twisted into a waking nightmare. So turn down the lights, make sure your doors are locked, and settle in, because the forest doesn't care how prepared you are, and neither do the things hiding in it. If you enjoyed tonight's terror, be sure to like the video, share your own eerie stories in the comments, or email your most unsettling true encounters to nightterrorinbox@gmail.com. You never know. Your nightmare might be next. Now, let's begin. The Stranger by Black Hollow Pond. A friend of mine, Travis, told me this after we went hiking last fall. We were swapping creepy stories by the fire, and then he got quiet and said, "There's something I've never really told anyone before. It happened a few years ago, and I still think about it whenever I hear something rustling in the woods." Back in 2016, Travis lived in a tiny town called Stillwater Pines. It was one of those blink and you miss it places, surrounded by flatlands and dense forest. The whole town was like a time capsule. No real nightlife, barely any cell reception, and if you wanted to do anything remotely fun, you had to drive almost an hour out to the next town. For locals like Travis and his buddy Kyle, that meant camping and hiking were the go-to escapes. One weekend, Kyle said a guy he knew had mentioned a cool hidden spot just 15 minutes outside town. Said it had a killer view of a lake. With nothing better to do, they grabbed their gear, drove out past the last gas station, and parked on a narrow gravel shoulder. The trail they followed wasn't even a real path, just a faded line through the trees, almost like the forest had tried to reclaim it. But they pushed through, backpacks loaded and spirits high. About an hour in, they finally reached the so-called camp. Except there was no lake, just a mossy, stagnant pond, choked with weeds and algae, surrounded by trees that blocked out half the sky. It looked like the kind of place you'd expect to find a body, not a scenic overlook. Travis laughed, thinking Kyle's friend was just messing with them. But as they stood there shaking their heads, Kyle nudged Travis and pointed across the water. There was a tent, barely visible, nestled between 2 crooked pine trees. It was old-looking, faded orange, and completely still. Then Travis's eyes caught movement just off to the side. A figure. Someone was standing at the edge of the pond, watching them. They weren't close enough to make out any details, but the person wasn't doing anything, just standing there, partially hidden by the branches. Travis gave a quick, awkward wave, hoping to play it cool. No response. They figured it was just a fellow camper, maybe someone who liked solitude. Weird, sure, but not unheard of. Trying not to overthink it, they set up camp on a hill a little ways back from the pond, keeping their fire pit close to the tents. The rest of the day was normal. Cards, jokes, some cold canned chili over the fire. But Travis kept glancing toward the pond. uneasy. The tent across the water never moved. No light, no fire, no signs of life. Just that one moment, that one stare. By nightfall, they'd almost forgotten about it. The woods had gone quiet, the sky was inky black, and the fire popped and cracked while they talked about dumb stuff. That's when Kyle suddenly stood up, fast. Travis spun around and saw someone standing behind them, 20 feet away, still. The person had long, messy black hair that hung down like wet vines, and they wore what looked like a long dark coat, or maybe a robe. The firelight didn't reach them, and the trees behind cast enough shadow that Travis couldn't even tell if they were holding anything. "Hey, are you okay?" Kyle called out, his voice a little shaky. No reply, just silence. Then the figure turned and slipped away into the darkness like they were never there. They both tried to laugh it off, that nervous kind of laughter that isn't real. Maybe it was the same person from the pond. Maybe they were just weird, harmless. That's what they told themselves anyway. Somehow they both fell asleep that night. Travis said he still doesn't understand how. They were young, maybe too dumb to be scared enough. But around 3 a.m., Travis woke up to someone violently shaking his tent and a voice whispering harshly, "Wake up, get up, now." It was Kyle, pale and breathing hard. As Travis climbed out, Kyle pointed toward the trees. "They were here," he said, "right next to your tent, just standing there. I woke up and saw them, watched them back away when I moved." Travis's heart dropped into his stomach. The forest was dead quiet. No bugs, no wind, just smoke from the dying fire and a cold silence pressing in on them. They didn't sleep again. They rebuilt the fire, kept their bags packed and flashlights ready, waiting for first light. Every branch, snap, or owl call had them on edge. When the sun finally cracked over the treetops, they were already hiking out, fast. Later that day, they went to the sheriff's office in Stillwater Pines, more out of responsibility than fear. They didn't expect much, just figured someone should know there was a creep in the woods. But within hours, they got a call back. The sheriff asked them to come in, said he had questions. Turns out that old orange tent belonged to a man named Evan Caldwell, reported missing over a month earlier. They had found his campsite abandoned weeks ago, but no body, no signs of foul play. He just vanished. When they showed Travis and Kyle the photos, both of them were sure. The man in the picture wasn't the one they saw. So then, who was watching them? And why were they hiding near the tent of someone who had disappeared? Travis said he still thinks about that night. He wonders what would have happened if Kyle hadn't woken up when he did, if they'd both just kept sleeping. And every so often, when he's deep in the woods and thinks he sees movement out of the corner of his eye, he says he still gets the feeling that someone's there, watching and waiting. The man who watched the fire. So I was talking to my cousin Mason one night after we got back from a short hunting trip, and he told me something that actually made me lose sleep. He said, "There's a reason I don't camp out behind my place anymore." I haven't told anyone the full story, until now. Mason owns a good chunk of wooded land just outside a small town in Missouri. Real quiet spot. No neighbors within shouting distance, just dense trees, old growth, and deer trails. A few years back, mid-October, crisp air, red leaves, he decided to spend a solo night camping on his own property. Nothing fancy, no views or lakes or anything Instagram-worthy, just a fire pit, a cheap tent, and the stillness of the woods. It was about a 10 to 15-minute walk from his back porch to the little clearing he'd cleared months earlier. He'd made camp there a dozen times before without issue. But that evening, As he was setting up the tent and gathering firewood, he noticed something that didn't sit right. Roughly 100 yards out, just past a patch of birch trees, someone was walking, moving steadily through his property, deeper into the woods. Mason froze. The guy wasn't dressed for hiking, wasn't carrying anything, just walking calmly, almost aimlessly. What rattled Mason was that the direction the man was headed meant he had to have come from Mason's land, possibly even from the direction of his house. But Mason hadn't seen or heard anyone approach. Now this wasn't public land. For someone to be back there, they'd have to cross either private property or go way off any known trail. But Mason's a pretty calm guy, not one to overreact. He figured maybe it was just a neighbor who'd wandered too far and let it go. The sun dipped behind the trees not long after, and with it came the stillness only a forest at night can offer. No wind, no birds, just the crackling fire and the occasional distant snap of a twig. Mason leaned back in his folding chair, wrapped up in a blanket, and watched the flames dance. Hours passed like that, peaceful, uneventful. Then just after 9 p.m. something shattered that calm. It started with the sound of twigs snapping. Then came footsteps, fast ones, running, full sprint, through the woods. Mason sat up straight, heart skipping a beat. The fire was still burning bright, but the woods beyond it were pitch black. He couldn't see anything, but he heard it. Someone running hard, fast, crashing through the trees, not toward him, but not away either. They blew past his camp, never slowing down, just disappearing deeper into the dark. He didn't move, didn't breathe. It was a person, no doubt. You can tell the difference, the weight of the steps, the pacing. It was human. But who runs full speed through pitch-black woods with no flashlight, no trail, no purpose? Eventually the sounds faded, and Mason told himself maybe it was just a prank, or someone high, or just something explainable. He even laughed to himself, trying to shake it off. It hadn't stopped near him, hadn't spoken, hadn't approached, so he stoked the fire again, sat back down, and stayed out there for a couple more hours. By 10, he let the flames die and zipped himself into the tent. The forest had gone deathly quiet again. He drifted off, listening to the distant creaks of branches above him. Sometime past midnight, Mason woke up in a rush. Footsteps, again. But this time, they were coming straight toward his tent. Fast. He barely had time to react before they stopped, right outside. He sat up, holding his breath, every nerve in his body awake. Through the thin tent fabric, he saw a silhouette. Someone was leaning forward, slowly swaying left and right, like they were trying to peer inside. And then came a sound Mason will never forget. A slow, ripping noise. A knife was slicing into the tent. A blade was cutting a slit just inches from his face. Through that opening, a pale face emerged. 2 eyes, locked on his. No emotion, just watching. Mason didn't think. He screamed, kicked the side of the tent open, and ran, barefoot, half-dressed, into the woods, full speed. Branches whipped him, roots snagged at his feet. But he didn't stop until his porch light came into view. He slammed the door behind him and called the police, heart thudding so loud he could barely hear the dispatcher. While he waited for the officers, Mason looked out his back window, and there he was, a dark figure, standing still between 2 trees just at the edge of the woods, watching the house. By the time the police arrived, the man was gone. No tracks, no sign, just the tent with the cut and Mason's footprints all the way back to the house. Over the next few days, officers did several sweeps of the area, but nothing ever turned up. No reports of trespassing, no missing persons matching the face Mason saw. Whoever it was, they knew the land, and they knew how to disappear. But what scared Mason the most wasn't the knife. It wasn't even the eyes. It was the fact that whoever this person was, they knew exactly where Mason lived. They stood outside his house and watched him after the attack. And as Mason told me this, he looked out the window again, just for a second. Like part of him was still expecting to see someone standing there. He hasn't camped out back since. The Stranger with the Empty Pack. A friend of mine, Colin, told me this story after we met up for drinks one night in early December. He said, "I haven't told anyone this before. Honestly, I've tried to forget it ever happened. But something about this time of year always brings it back. It was 3 years ago, early December in the Midwest. Still no snow yet, but cold enough to make your breath hang in the air. Colin's the kind of guy who camps often, squeezing in as many trips as he can before winter really hits. That year, he'd saved up a long weekend for what he planned to be his final solo trip before the deep freeze rolled in. He picked a remote trail about an hour north of where he lived, one he'd visited once before during warmer weather, just a modest hike-in spot near a shallow pond and a few stands of pine trees. No campsites, no amenities, just flat grass, a worn footpath, and silence. Perfect for what he wanted. Isolation. He arrived around mid-morning. 2 vehicles were parked at the trailhead, a clean minivan and a beat-up pickup that looked like it had been rolled through a swamp. Colin didn't think much of it. Other hikers, probably already on their way out. About 30 minutes into the hike, he passed an older guy and his kid walking in the opposite direction. Looked like they'd spent the night and were heading home. That accounted for one of the vehicles. He reached the site about midday, surprised to find it completely empty. No tents, no people. Just the sound of wind and water trickling through the nearby pond. He pitched his tent near the edge of the tree line and spent a while journaling, something he always did when he camped alone. The day got colder fast, and by mid-afternoon he had a fire going, huddled close to it in a thick flannel-lined coat. That's when the man arrived. Colin saw him walking slowly down the trail, approaching from the same direction Colin had come from. He was in his 40s, wearing a heavy coat and a scarf wrapped high over the lower half of his face. A small backpack hung off one shoulder, too small for camping gear, and oddly flat, like it was empty or just carried a few things at most. The man didn't speak. He just gave Colin a nod, then walked past him and sat down under a tree about 30 feet away, facing the pond. Colin waited for someone else to show up, another hiker, maybe a friend of the man's. But no one came. Minutes passed, then more. The guy just sat there, barely moving. No fire, no sleeping bag, no tent. Just stillness. At first, Colin thought maybe the man was just taking a break. But 45 minutes later, he was still sitting there, not scrolling on his phone, not eating, just watching the water. Then, without a word, the man got up and walked toward the fire. He stopped just across from Colin, flames flickering between them, and said with a too-wide smile, "Mind if I share your fire? It's colder than I expected out here." Colin nodded, trying to stay polite. "Sure, no problem." But something was off. The man's smile was all wrong. His mouth grinned, but his eyes didn't follow. They were half-lidded and dull, like he hadn't slept in days. Colin asked if he had a tent, since the temperature was supposed to drop into the 20s that night. The man simply shook his head. Number, and then silence. 10 solid minutes of it. They both just sat there, the stranger staring at the flames, Colin pretending to poke at the firewood, heart rate climbing. He knew he didn't want to sleep here anymore. He could feel it. Something was wrong. But packing up in front of the guy felt risky. Still, the sun was almost down, and the longer he waited, the darker that trail back would get. Finally, Colin stood, walked to his tent, and started rolling up his sleeping bag. The man never said a word, but Colin could feel the stare, like heat pressing on the back of his neck. When he turned around, the man was still sitting there, watching him, smiling. Then without a word, he stood, turned, and walked back toward the tree he'd been sitting under earlier. But he didn't stop. He kept going, right into the trees. Gone. Colin froze, listening. No footsteps, no rustling, just silence. He waited a few seconds, then started shoving gear into his pack as fast as he could. He didn't even douse the fire. He left it burning on purpose, hoping maybe the man was watching from the woods and would think he was still there. The walk back was brutal, frigid and dark, the only light coming from a small headlamp and the occasional sliver of moonlight cutting through the bare branches. Every sound made Colin jump. Every snapped twig behind him made him spin around, expecting to see that man with the too still smile coming up behind him. But no one came. He made it back to the trailhead in one piece. The minivan was still there, but the muddy truck gone, which didn't make sense. Colin never heard anyone pass him. The guy didn't seem like he'd had a vehicle nearby. His pack was empty. His clothes were worn, and yet the truck was gone. Driving home, Colin couldn't stop glancing in his rearview mirror. The whole way, he kept expecting to see headlights tailing him. Or worse, someone in the back seat. Nothing ever happened after that. No sightings, no break-ins, just silence. But Colin still wonders what would have happened if he'd stayed. If the man had wandered into the woods not to leave, but to wait. Maybe hoping Colin would let his guard down, drift off to sleep, and never wake up. He told me, "I think that guy was planning something. I could feel it. Whatever it was, I left just in time." And now, every time December rolls around, Colin doesn't go camping anymore.